Hi everyone, my name is Elaine, and today I'm going to be talking about the crystal abilities found in Unison League. After telling you what they are, I'm going to rate them. So simple. Now, let's get started. First up is Crystal Harden, which is usable at Guild Level 1. It increases crystal physical and magical defense by 80% for 40 seconds. Okay, this one is just absolute trash, which is probably why you get it so early on. I can't even begin to express how many times I've turned to Jeremy during guild battle and said, wait, what was their punishment? I honestly can't tell the difference between when this ability is and isn't in effect. It may be because I'm a veteran player and my team usually goes into the crystal buffed, so this added defense isn't noticeable. I'm not sure. But I really don't think that even if that were the case, anything would be any different. If you have nothing else to use this ability. It's better than nothing. But I honestly can't see it really making a difference in guild battles for any guilds outside Block C. Basically, guilds just starting out. Rating 0 out of 10. Next up is Protect, which is usable at Guild Level 1. It reduces crystal physical and magical attack damage taken by 50% for 40 seconds. This one is just like Crystal Harden in my book, utterly useless for the same reasons. Use it if you have to, and then dump it like a hot potato the first chance you get. Rating 0 out of 10. Third on my list is Blind, which is usable at Guild Level 10. It blinds all enemies for 10 seconds with a success value of 100. Blind is a status ailment that has a chance to make a player's attack miss its target. This is definitely better than what you started with, but still isn't great. Part of this assessment stems from the fact that its success value isn't actually 100% in every case. Sometimes it is, but most often it isn't. This is because most players have unlocked their monster's hidden potential, and several monsters have a hidden potential which increases blind resistance. An example would be Fiend Ibaraki Doji. There are also furniture pieces such as the large teddy bear, which increase blind resistance. The point is, there are ways to counteract this ability, rendering it useless. In addition, Blind only has a chance to make a player's attack miss its target, meaning that even if an enemy is blinded, they may get lucky and continue to hit their target consistently as though they had not been blinded, basically making this ability useless. Furthermore, the 10-second duration of this ability, if it manages to hit an enemy, isn't long enough to make much of a difference in my opinion. In conclusion, I think this ability is better for newer guilds with newer players who are probably going to be facing similar guilds, who don't have these gear pieces and monsters with unlocked potential to protect themselves from blind. Guilds that may actually be affected by blind, so that the user experiences some benefit from its use. Rating 2 out of 10. Fourth on my list is Paralyze, which is usable at Guild Level 12. It paralyzes all enemies for 10 seconds with a success value of 100. Paralysis is a status ailment which has the potential to cancel a player's actions during the course of battle. What I have to say about this ability is similar to what I said about Blind. Paralyze can be countered by a monster's hidden potential and by the effects of furniture gear. Players who are paralyzed can also continue attacking. The status ailment doesn't affect their movements all of the time. It only does so on occasion unless the player is really, really unlucky. The 10-second duration also isn't long and won't make much of a difference. I'm definitely not a big fan of this crystal ability. Rating 2 out of 10. Next up on my list is Confused, which is usable at Guild Level 14. It confuses all enemies for 10 seconds with a success value of 100. Confusion is a status ailment which has a chance to cancel a player's actions by causing them to heal their opposition or hurt themselves or one of their teammates. Again, this ability can be countered by furniture skills and a monster's hidden potential. It only lasts 10 seconds and only works to your benefit some of the time. Furthermore, and I forgot to mention this earlier, this ability, similar to both Paralyze and Blind, can be cleared by several cleric healing abilities. With that being said, I prefer this ability to both Blind and Paralyze for a few reasons. First, there's a chance that the enemy will heal your crystal. This chance rises if you're facing NPCs and computer-controlled or auto characters who often make questionable decisions. Second, there's a chance that this ability will cause your enemies to hurt themselves and or each other. The damage they inflict on their own team may be all the edge you need to snipe them before a unison battle or actually knock them all out with your monsters, if you win a unison battle and turn the tide of your guild battle. After all, monsters and their abilities often determine the outcome of a guild battle. Rating 4 out of 10. Next up is Balancing, which is usable at Guild Level 16. It removes buffs from all enemies. This is an okay ability. My problem with it is that it requires your enemy to be buffed, which isn't always the case when they are attacking the crystal. I also don't believe it affects special status buffs, like increases to critical hit damage. So even if it lands on a buffed team, it may not wipe everything you would want it to out and allow the opposing team to do just enough damage to defeat you. With that being said, it wipes out all regular status buffs, which can make a huge difference when considering your opponent's damage output. However, and this comes into play with abilities we'll discuss in more detail later, like Karma as well, many classes have abilities that apply buffs to themselves and or their teammates. An example would be a soldier's charisma. Rating 5 out of 10. And then came the Resistance Down ability, which is usable at Guild Level 18. It reduces status ailment resistance of all enemies by 100 for 60 seconds. This is another ability which can be countered. An example of a counter would be the Sun God's Blessing, which increases status ailment resistance by 10%. It's a constant effect during battle and is unlocked by equipping Amaterasu's Reflector, Headdress, and Garb in your main slots. While this effect lasts longer than the others we discussed previously, like Confuse and Paralyze, if it hits, I don't feel as though it's particularly helpful. Once you escape the first few rings of your main class, most people people move onto abilities which lack the potential to inflict status ailments, leaving monsters to do most of the work. By the time you and your opponents face off again and your team rolls through all its monsters after a unison battle, this ability's effects have probably worn off. Now, there's still a chance that your monster's skills will inflict a status ailment on your opponent, but it really doesn't matter. If you're inflicting them with monsters, they're probably dead. This crystal ability is basically worthless as far as I'm concerned. Rating, 1 out of 10. Next up is Makeshift Outer Wall, which is usable at guild level 20. It nullifies damage taken by the crystal for 10 hits. This ability isn't bad, but its effectiveness can be reduced by several different things. First, opponents can spam attack or its replacement, which often doesn't do as much damage as their other abilities, so their stronger abilities aren't wasted on the crystal until Makeshift Outer Wall wears off. These abilities also tend to have lower cost, making it easier to spam them. Second, abilities which hit the target multiple times, like a mage's Lunatic Ray, can be used to destroy this crystal ability fairly rapidly, and most players equip these kinds of abilities during guild battles. Third, players can spam their abilities with lower cooldown times, like an Archer's Disarming Trap or Astrolabe, which both have a cooldown of 6 seconds, in order to clear Makeshift Outer Wall rapidly. There are also various abilities, both from monsters and classes, which can ignore nullifying damage abilities. Finally, if this ability comes into effect right before your opponents re-engage in battle with you, it's basically useless. There's no time for them to do any more damage and for this ability to be useful. I didn't mention this earlier, but this is similar to abilities like Crystal Harden unless you wipe your opponents really, really rapidly. So while not a useless ability, this one definitely isn't the best you could equip. Rating, 4 out of 10. Next up is Bad Omen, which is usable at guild level 22. It reduces the critical hit chance of all enemies by 50% for 60 seconds and reduces the critical hit damage of all enemies by 50 for 60 seconds. This one isn't my favorite. While it lasts a fair amount of time, its ability isn't particularly helpful unless your opponents have a lot of critical hit buffs going and are constantly doing critical hit damage. I say this only because while critical hit damage can be astronomically high, it doesn't appear to happen very often unless you have these buffs and or your opponent is broken, subjecting them to larger amounts of damage whenever they hit and damage is dealt. Rating, 3 out of 10. Next up is Shackles of Admonition, which is usable at guild level 24. It reduces both the physical and magical attack of all enemies by 80% for 60 seconds. This ability definitely isn't bad. It's going to reduce your enemy's damage output, making it harder for them to finish off your crystal and defeat you. Also, when you re-engage with them, it'll be harder for them to snipe you should they need to in order to win a unison battle. However, this ability shows up as a regular debuff on all affected parties, so it has the potential to be cleared by a cleric. Players can also use their abilities, which have buff effects to counteract it. Rating, 5 out of 10. Next up is Kismet, which is usable at guild level 26. The crystal activates Kismet. Targets affected by Kismet remove certain status debuffs, take their stack's remaining duration, and convert them to their corresponding buff counterparts. It's essentially the opposite of Karma. I'm not sure how helpful this one will be. I don't feel as though the crystal is often debuffed by a team's abilities, and even if it is, only some of the buffs would be helpful. The crystal can't attack after all. This more or less renders Kismet useless. Now, I'm not going to say the crystal is never debuffed. It is on occasion, but I don't think it happens enough or to such a high degree that this ability is worth equipping to your crystal. Rating, 4 out of 10. And then came Slow Trap, which is usable at guild level 30. It reduces the cost recovery speed of all enemies by 10 for 120 seconds. This one isn't bad. You need cost to do damage, so having something that slows down the rate by which your opponents regain their cost is helpful. Its 2-minute length also makes it far more helpful than some of the other crystal abilities, which have a far shorter duration. With that being said, it can be countered or nullified by monster effects as well as various class abilities. Example would be an Archer's Feather Rain when it is used in combination with Rapid Fire or Beautiful Nature. It increases the cost recovery speed of all allies by 5 for 20 seconds. And a Cleric's Holy Circle, which increases your character's cost recovery speed by 10 for 40 seconds. It can also be countered by a monster's cost recovery skill or by various class abilities which recover cost. Examples include a Mage's Ether Exchange and Fanatic Soul and a Cleric's Holy Circle, which recovers 20 cost for all allies excluding yourself in addition to its increasing your character's cost recovery speed and recovering 30% of max HP for all allies. Slow Trap can also be countered to some degree by cost recovery gear such as Kronos' Pistol, rating 6 out of 10. Next up is Coward's Whisper, which is usable at guild level 32. It reduces the unison gauge gains of all enemies by 3 for 40 seconds. I like this one. It's a great counter for all those guilds who use the cheer strat. It's much harder to get uni if your gains have been slowed or your haste has wasted away beneath Coward's Whisper. At the same time, this crystal ability is interesting in the sense that it's a good counter for the people who use cheer. They can be so effectively countered by those same people who are using the cheer strat because they can just haste with their monsters again, continue cheering, etc. Rating 6.5 out of 10. Next up is Unison Seal, which which is usable at guild level 34. It prohibits unison from all enemies for 60 seconds with a success value of 80. This one can be really annoying when you encounter it, especially if you do so right before you return to the main battle and have to fend off your foes, or take a loss in a unison battle because you can't use your unison anymore. With that being said, there is a chance that this ability won't hit your opponents. This chance increases with things like a monster's hidden potential. Some monsters, like Scepter Master Vermis, increase a character's prohibit unison resistance when its potential is fully unlocked. Furthermore, if Unison Seal hits, it can be cleared by a number of cleric healing abilities, rendering it useless. This is extremely easy to do if your opponent A has a cleric, B doesn't return to fighting you within 5 seconds of setting this crystal ability off. Rating 6.5 out of 10. Next up is Karma, which is usable at guild level 36. It casts Karma on all enemies. Karma removes buffs, which can be removed by status buff removal, takes a target's stats and remaining duration, and transforms them into their corresponding debuff counterparts. I like this ability. Most often, your enemies are going to go into your crystal buffed. If they're particularly well buffed, they're going to do tons of damage and probably defeat you. Having something like this, which can turn their once awesome buffs into powerful debuffs, can be all your guild needs to turn the tides in a guild battle, buying you just enough time to come back and win. With that being said, the debuffs can be cleared by several cleric healing abilities, for example, but since some guilds don't play with them, and they're usually sitting in the wings for the crystal breaking portion of a guild battle, this may not matter. Either they won't be cleansed and you get the full effect of the karma, or there will be delays as the cleric swaps in to heal everyone. In which case, there'd be one less person doing damage to your crystal as well. This ability can also be countered by some monster skills. An example would be Esterosa the Love, rating 8 out of 10. Next up is Mana Drain, which is usable at guild level 38. It reduces the cost of all enemies by 30. I really like this one. It's not as helpful, for obvious reasons, if the opposing guild's members didn't have any cost to drain, or have so much cost that the loss of 30 is more or less negligible. But it's great if it hits during a sort of sweet spot where they have between 40 and 60 cost or so, and taking a Mana Drain hit makes it much harder for them to keep on hitting your crystal with abilities one right after the other. This is because it severely limits their ability to do damage to your crystal since they simply don't have enough cost anymore. With that being said, this ability can be countered by things such as cost recovery abilities, which most people carry and most classes have access to. Rating 7.5 out of 10. Last but not least is Mirrorguard, which is usable at guild level 40. It casts a 50% damage reflect barrier on your crystal for 20 seconds. I like this move. It's most effective against teams with inactive players because they're more likely to continue hitting the crystal, whereas their active teammates are more likely to stop if they cannot break through it with one of their abilities. This brings me to my next point. Several classes have abilities which allow them to break through Mirrorguard and continue attacking without being hindered by its reflective effects. An example would be a mage using Starburst. Furthermore, monster effects such as Piercer, Frenzy, Twilight, and Kijin have the ability to counter Mirrorguard, and there are several monsters which have these abilities, and most people have multiple monsters which have one of them. An example of a monster with the Kijin ability is Fiend Ibaraki Doji. An example with the Piercer ability is Pollux and Castor. An example of a monster with the Twilight ability is Cymaris. An example of a monster with the Frenzy ability is Benimaru. Mirrorguard is also useless if it is applied right before the enemy guild returns to the screen in which they battle you. There's no time for them to attack your crystal and blow themselves up. Rating 7 out of 10. In conclusion, the trash crystal abilities are Crystal Harden, Protect, and Resistance Down. They just aren't very helpful in the grand scheme of things. The best abilities the crystal has to offer are definitely Mirrorguard, Mana Drain, and Karma. These are the abilities which can turn the tides of war. The only downside is that they can all be countered by various means, as can everything else on this list. And there you have it, my discussion and rating for each of Unison League's crystal abilities. What did you think of what I had to say about each ability and the ratings I assigned them? Was I just a little bit too harsh? Did I leave anything out? Please let me know down below in the comments. I always like to know what you guys think. And if you like what you saw here today, please smash that like button until it's blue. Subscribe, ring that bell so you'll know what's up, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye guys, happy gaming.